When hearing about Norway, most people will picture the dramatic fjords of the western country, with dramatic peaks, cliffs, and waterfalls cascading off of strong stone. What people usually don't picture is more than likely the area of Trondheim. Nestled in the center of modern Norway, Trondheim is not a very dramatic place. While still beautiful, the mountains are a little smaller, the fjord a little calmer, and the city as a whole goes to sleep long before the midsummer sun dips in the sky. But what you may not expect is that this often forgotten city might have been the most important part of Iron Age Norway, so much so that the very center of ancient Norwegian spirituality may have existed in this very place I stand right now. Join me in this episode of discovery, adventures, and historical mysteries that may scratch the surface of a 1,000-year cover-up first instituted by the early Norwegian church. Hello, my name is Jacob Todson, and welcome to Trondheim, Norway. Let's start at the very beginning of my own journey in this quaint city. I arrived and started asking locals what historic sites I could see around town, and nearly every single one of them would tell me the Old Town Bridge and the Nidaros Cathedral. Nidaros Cathedral is an impressive monument to the Christian history of the city, built above the bones of Norway's patron saint, Saint Olav. The cathedral receives thousands of visitors from around the world every single year, both to see the spectacle of its beauty, but also to receive pilgrims from the over 60% of Norwegians who still identify with the Norwegian Church as their official religion. It is at learning the history of Nidaros Cathedral that I began to question and unravel the mystery of this unassuming place. The very name of Nidaros Cathedral gives us our first thread of history to follow. Nidaros was the given name of the city by the church, who had a strong influence of the city in the majority of its history. The name of the city bounced between Trondheim and Nidaros for hundreds of years until it was officially changed in 1928 to the name that we know today of Trondheim. When reading through the history of the city on the official Trondheim website, I started to ask questions of the information that was available. Officially, the city was founded in 997 by Olav Tryggvason and was the capital of Norway until 1217. But also according to the website, both Harald Finehair and his son, Hakon the Good, were crowned at the Althing in Trondheim, both of which who lived and died long before Trondheim was officially declared a city. What this proves is that this area had a history before Olav Tryggvason. Not only did it have a history, but one important enough that it was the place that two of the Iron Age's most famous Vikings were crowned as kings. Events that would surely have brought hundreds of people, merchants, and nobles to the area during the coronations. And considering that both of these kings followed the traditional Norse beliefs, there would have been many religious rites performed here as well. This really got me thinking, how far back does this history actually go? Are we to believe that 997 was the only time that history saw this small little peninsula as being important? Especially since we know that people have lived in Trondheim Fjord for thousands of years, even possibly as far back as the Stone Age. As also listed on the city website, several stone carvings have been found around the city that prove its inhabitants for thousands of years before Nidaros. But where are these stone carvings? Well, that is where the adventure truly began for me. And so I rented a car, packed my gear, and headed east on a journey to find whispers of the ancient people of central Norway. You would not believe what I've gone through so far to get to these rock carvings. Oh my gosh. So there's no just way to search them easily. So I searched online and found a few, and it's taken me to this little museum area that I'm in right now that has pictures like there's rock carvings here. And then I ended up in this very scary tunnel. I kid you not, this is where it led me. The stone carvings? No. Where am I? Where are they? I don't know. So hopefully I find them. And then after the scary tunnel, I went into the museum and found an employee, and I'm like, hey, so where are the rock carvings? And they're like, oh, those aren't here. They're somewhere else. And then they had to call somebody that knew where they were. And then finally they're like, okay, you need to go to hell. I kid you not. I need to go to the town named Hell and then follow some signs called like Bjakatsaka or something like that, or Bjikana, something with the Bjaka in the very beginning. I can't remember now, but then I'm going to go there, follow these signs, and hopefully find some rock carvings. So it's not always as easy. This is, I think, why I like Scotland so much, is it was in English. So wish me luck, and I will see you in hell. In case you thought I was joking. Sadly, I'm not a scholar or anything like that, but I actually really do believe that these have been altered quite a bit by people that live here. I mean, we see some modern graffiti right there to someone's initials. A lot of modern graffiti here that is definitely not original. It's really sad. It's just not really well preserved, and they are so very exposed. So like this, you can see right here, it's just not very in there at all. But then up there, it's very, very deep. So that makes me really think that people have been coming here, most likely children, and carving into it a little bit more. Honestly, wish there was more I could tell you about this site. At the time of me recording this segment right here, I simply just don't know that much. So if you hear anything afterwards, that's been some research and some voiceover afterwards. But as far as I can tell, there is no humanoid figures on this rock carving here. It's all animals. Again, maybe a boar here, a cow, a couple other maybe dogs, and then the main stag here, which definitely is the main sight to see here. I mean, it's really beautiful. It's very large. So we have one, maybe two stags here, actually. Definitely one big stag, and then maybe like a doe as well right next to it. I can't really tell, but, and then again, maybe a fish over there. But the main thing to take away from this segment is people have been here for a very long time, at least since the Bronze Age. If I were to guess, these were also Bronze Age carvings, because the Trondheim carvings are Bronze Age as well. These could be hunter-gatherer carvings. That would be interesting. I would love to let you know if I figure that out. This right here has been worth this entire misadventure of a day, hunting down these ancient sites, because this is truly incredible, and one of the first for me. So the rock carvings in the central area of Norway are not from the Bronze Age, they are from the Stone Age. And so they come from between 2000 BCE all the way back to 10,000 BCE. And the way they date these is because of the water levels. So at one point, the ocean level was higher, and so the water levels used to be up here and then descended. So it's based on like how close these are to the water levels at one point, but that's besides the point. What I really want to focus on is that this rock panel back here is truly incredible because it represents some very early human artwork going all the way back to the Stone Age here in Norway, and I'll just show it to you. I really hope you're feeling the sense of adventure that I am from this video, because I really discovered this stuff along with you throughout this day. A lot of this has not been planned, and so this is kind of the behind the scenes a little bit, because not always does it go according to plan or have a solid plan, but I fucking love this. You know, so the first rock carving site we went to had designs very similar to this. They had two deer, buck, I guess. And here we are about 40 miles away, I think, something like that, maybe 30 miles away. And we have nearly identical designs in a different area. And these ones more well preserved. And you see what I mean earlier. Those designs were much deeper. These designs are really not that in there. Obviously, these are more well preserved. There's a sign. These have been repainted, as I already discussed in the Swedish video. This is a common practice, typically done by archaeologists, because otherwise it is very hard to see these things. Considering I come into this like very unknowledgeable of this area, all the information is coming from these signs. But again, these signs are sometimes all we have. This isn't necessarily on a Wikipedia article. But the sign is saying that the theory around these symbols is that they represent some form of animal magic, whether that's shape-shifting or connecting for hunting or something like that. Now, what I find interesting myself about this is the amount of sea life that is here. Like over here, we have a really intricate, like that is clearly a dolphin or a whale or a killer whale. And I mean, that means they saw one of those up close. They were swimming next to one. They've seen one come up next to a ship, thousands of years ago. And it's not the only one. There's several on here of fish or whales. And it seems like that's a common theme with this series of rock carvings. We do have humanoid shapes on this one, which is more common in the Trondheim carvings that I saw in Sweden. There's a lot of humanoid shapes in the Bronze Age rock carvings. Here we do have some humanoid shapes. This could be a regular human, or this could be the representation of a humanoid deity. We don't know. There's absolutely no way of knowing that. But all I can really say about the spiritual history of Norway and this region before the Viking Age is that people were here, standing where I'm standing right now, carving ancient markings for animals, boats, and humanoids, and more than likely there was a ritual purpose to this.
Stone carvings do not just exist anywhere in the northern world. These are early signs of hunter-gatherer societies coming together for some form of purpose, whether religious, cultural, or political. Regardless, stone carvings prove that people were beginning to congregate and leave messages for their future generations, or perhaps even for the gods they followed. It may be a stretch to say, however, I believe the various stone carvings around Trondheim Fjord allude to the region being a place of spiritual significance before Olav Tryggvason wrote it into history. With that, let us finally discuss Olav Tryggvason and the events that he put into motion that still may affect the way Norway still views their ancient sites today. The information surviving of Olav Tryggvason is fairly scattered, particularly around his early years and his death. However, one consistency survives, and it was his desire to convert all of Norway and its territories into Christianity and bound together it all under one Christian king. While Olav would not fully succeed in his quest by his death in 1000 CE, he would succeed in sending missionaries to convert the Orkney Islands, as well as baptizing Leif Erikson himself so that he could convert the people of Greenland. This conversion is always painted in a positive light by the church today. However, in the case of Iceland, we have accounts of what this conversion really looked like, and it was far from peaceful. Olav dispatched Stefnir Thorvaldsson, a native Icelander, to convert the populace of Iceland. What this conversion entailed was Stefnir desecrating pagan temples and destroying the idols of the gods across Iceland before being captured and made an exile of the island for the rest of his life. After Stefnir's failure, Olav sent another missionary who too failed at his mission to convert the people of Iceland. This enraged Olav, who made his tactics more nefarious after this point. He imprisoned any Icelander he could find in Norway and cut off all trade to Iceland. Olav threatened to kill all of his captives and maintain the trade hold, which would lead to many people in Iceland to starve to death unless they converted to Christianity. It was under this threat of death that the Icelandic people agreed to convert publicly to the Christian faith. If Olav would employ such tactics of desecration, murder, and starvation to convert an island 1,000 miles away, what do we think he would do to the very city that he said he founded in 997 when he served as king? At this point, I can only speculate. I do truly believe that Trondheim did house some form of city before Olav declared it so, and that this once ancient city was also a spiritual center of activity in central Norway, and that all traces of this history were destroyed by Olav to make way for his Christian kingdom. While it is not undeniable evidence of this theory, there is another piece of the puzzle that I want to share with you, and that is within history we see something very similar happen in Sweden, particularly in Uppsala. Gamla Uppsala was at one point the capital of Sweden, where a long line of Swedish kings ruled. It was also at Uppsala that a temple was recorded to stand to the heathen gods 1,000 years ago, and that it was also the site of ancient all things in Sweden that attracted hundreds of people to witness law as well as heathen rituals that would include offerings, sacrifices, as well as rituals to the heathen gods that we will never know. Uppsala would also become the main target of conversion within Christianity, as it stood at the spiritual heart of Sweden. So much so that the Catholic Church decided to place the home of the Archbishop, as well as a cathedral, right on top of the old temple of Uppsala. All of these markers can also be seen in Trondheim's history. It was a place of general assembly, kings were crowned here, and it was the main target of conversion.
also just happens to contain the historic home of the archbishops of Norway. Even if a heathen temple once stood here in Trondheim, it would have not looked like the current Nidaros Cathedral. In fact, the early church that was placed here in the past was much, much smaller than what stands today. Nearby in a historic village lies an example of what this early church would have looked like, and possibly even give us a glimpse of what a possible heathen temple would have looked like as well. Hello, we're taking a brief pause in the middle of this video. This is VoiceOver Jacob. I'm doing the final work here to get this video together. This has seriously been a multi-week project with lots of research, driving into the countryside, hunting down ancient burial mounds, reading through tons of research, talking to people, getting the footage, getting it edited, writing the script, doing the voiceover work, and doing so much more. It's just me. There's no one else doing this. And so if you're enjoying this video, please make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all that due diligence. That really does help small YouTubers like me. And also, if you want to support this channel directly, I do have a Patreon down below as well, where you can support this channel at a $5, $10, $15, or $20 tier, and there's various rewards there for you as well. And truly, it goes directly into supporting what I'm doing here, to going to these places, to reporting on these stories. I'm so grateful to live this life and so grateful to do this for my job, but I really couldn't do it without the people on Patreon. And so if you want to join those people, please head down below to the link. I'm also writing books. There's a book out there, it's called A Yule Story, and I'm going to be writing a book about my adventures abroad and what I've learned. So be sure to look out for those things. Otherwise, we will get back to this video, and I hope you're enjoying it. So let's get back to Trondheim and its mysterious ancient past. It is important to remember that in my argument here, saying that there was probably a spiritual center here in Trondheim or Nidaros, it was more than likely quite small still. This is more than likely what existed here in the past. So even if there was some form of structure dedicated to the pagan deities, to the ancient religions here, it would have been more like this. Now this is a stave church that has been recreated kind of with some of the original materials from the era. So this is from the 12th century, so a very old stave church, and would have more than likely look like this. And the thing that I find interesting is it really hasn't adapted too much of the church look. There is no steeple, there is no cross on it. At most there would have been a cross on the outside entrance. And so this could have been what any kind of pagan temple would have looked like. It would have not been that big, it would have been quite small because the population in Norway still wasn't huge. All right, everyone, I am inside the stave church here in this little recreation village, and this has been made mostly to the style of the past, at least the 12th century. And so one thing I wanted to note here is the account we have of Adam of Bremen coming from Uppsala, Sweden. This is one of the only accounts of a physical building that we have for the ancient Norse, or really a lot of the ancient European tribes that followed their indigenous practices, at least as far as we know. And so most of our accounts are of sacred groves, oak tree groves, or places named after gods, or even like Irminsul and oak trees being dedicated to Thor and things like that. And so to have an account of someone, even though it was a monk, saying that there was a physical temple at Uppsala is really interesting. And it's definitely the part of my argument that I don't really have proof to show you that there was a physical temple here in Norway. However, I am inclined to believe that because of the archbishopcy, because of the church being built there, and it being chosen as the place for the new Christian faith to come into Norway. And not to mention, since it was the spiritual center, it was the cultural center, it was the political center. So it just makes sense that at one point it was the spiritual center of the Norse faith as it existed in the past. And so the thing I wanted to bring up here, according to the Adam of Bremen account, is the temple in Uppsala had 3 totems to the gods, 3 idols to them, 3 statues. And so I think this temple would look remarkably the same if it was a part of the Norse faith. And so instead of the altarpiece here with the Christian cross, we would have the totems to the gods, and in here would be the interior worshiping space. There's a few other accounts we can go off of, including from Saxo Grammaticus's The History of the Danes, Volume 2, which is a really rare book, and I'm lucky enough to have read a PDF of it. It describes a Slavic temple very similar to this. In the center of the room, or towards the back, I can't remember, but in the room there was a totem of Svetovid, a Slavic deity. And in there, they would pile up bread all the way up to show fertility and wealth, and then they would use the statue of Svetovid to predict the future. And so we have a Slavic temple really not that far away from Denmark and then into Scandinavia that looked similar to this as it was described by Saxo Grammaticus. And so an interior temple is possible. Was there one here in Norway? I'm not sure. But if there was, this is very similar to what I think it would have looked like, except there would have been totems to the gods over here, possibly in the center of the room. But really, a lot of this is just imaginative. But if you can use that imagination, if there was a temple, this is what it probably would have looked like.
There is one element that Gamla Uppsala has that is not present in Trondheim today, and that is surviving burial mounds, particularly ones reserved for people of the upper class, as the main feature surviving in Uppsala today is the 3 large king mounds. But even in Sweden, these king mounds only represent a fraction of the burial mounds that once existed in the area around Uppsala. It is suggested that at one time more than 3,000 burial mounds existed around the ancient site of Uppsala. At this point in my research, I was not able to find any burial mounds around Trondheim today. However, I was able to find a site just across the fjord in the ancient area of Frosta that once contained a large collection of burial mounds that are now nearly completely faded away into memory.
And now we have arrived at the monument of the Frostating. It just sounds weird if I don't say it with a slight accent. But in seriousness, this is the supposed or proposed ancient site of the General Assemblies, or all things that occurred between 600 and 1600, according to the sign I just read over here. So for at least 1,000 years, people from all around this valley came to this place, this area, and would make the laws of the land, and would go over the laws, and would discuss any court issues that popped up. But typically around the pagan era as well, this is also during all things we see religious festivals happen around them as well. Now, that's not a guarantee, and I don't have any proof for that, but I do know that there are several other instances that all things and general assemblies were also religious events, or had religious events around them because of the sacredness in the ancient past. And considering this site was used at least during the 600s going forward, that's a few hundred years of pagan history that occurred right here as well. It's also here where I have to report some very sad news. Is a general feeling of neglect of the ancient sites up here, at least in central northern Norway, the Trondheim fjord area. And this is not something to say anything negative against modern Norwegian people. This is something that's happened over the last few hundred years. At one point, this valley, this area, had at least 17 large burial mounds, possibly for jarls and or kings. So you can see right here, all the red dots, those are potential grave mounds that have been scattered about. Now the sign says that most of them are destroyed. However, there's a picture up here of one, so there could still be one in this valley, but here are the original sites that could have been around. So really interesting area. Oh, and then also there is a chapel here as well, which again tells me that this used to be an ancient spiritual site as well for the ancient pagan people, because usually churches are built, at least in these areas, on ancient pagan sites. Not always, but considering this was an ancient assembly place, that and the raven that keeps on flying above me somewhere out there, I would say yes, more than likely this place used to be used for ancient spiritual practices, as well as the General Assembly of Northern Norway.
None of these burial mounds were findable on Google Maps or modern GPS, but I was able to find a map that marked these sites and their locations. And so what I did is I marked them on my own GPS, and I took to the road to see how many I could find. In my hours of searching and asking locals, I was only able to find 2 surviving burial mounds on the Frosta Peninsula, one of which was actually marked on the local map. However, the very people who lived next door didn't even know it was there. The last burial mound I was able to locate luckily had an information board that came along with it. And what was revealed to me both gave me excitement, as it was further proof of the significance of this region in ancient Norway, but it also filled my heart with sorrow. What the sign revealed is at one point 150 burial mounds existed on this peninsula alone, nearly all of which have been removed in the last 200 years. And this number of 150 is also more than likely inaccurate, because this data was more than likely not collected until at least 200 years ago, meaning that there were potentially even more burial mounds that have been lost to time. If over 150 burial mounds existed on this small peninsula, what about Trondheim, a place where the assembly crowned their kings? Surely even more burial mounds existed in such a place. Only our imaginations can think of a number. But with the connections of Uppsala, I dare say the amount of burial mounds that existed around Trondheim could have been around the hundreds. Destroyed nefariously out of ignorance or apathy, the ancient history of this valley is all but a whisper to our modern ears, and sadly this reality is not getting any better, as the future of the 2 burial mounds I was able to find may very well be short.
Another feature of Uppsala is the mentioning of a healing well near a sacred tree. And the history of healing wells across Central Europe and into the UK and really all around, healing wells are one of the few things that the Catholic Church had a real hard time removing from the culture and tradition of the people that existed here before Christianity. And even into the Christianization process, people still wanted to go to these healing wells for their healing properties and for their connection. And so the majority of these healing wells still exist today, but have been given stories tied to saints. Weirdly enough, here in Trondheim, there is also a well to Saint Olav. This well is said to have sprung from where his body was buried, or where his body was at some point, and has healing properties, and it was one of the stories that is attested to him as a saint. Now, as we're going to dive into a little bit here, the actual stories of him being a saint are for the most part very made up, because his life was actually very short. Saint Olav, or Olaf Haraldsson, only lived to be about 35 before he died in battle. Regardless, he didn't perform many miracles during his life besides fighting in battles. It isn't until his death that the stories begin to come out about his sainthood and about all these wonderful miraculous things, such as his blood curing blindness, or the fact that he can fight sea serpents and has killed a sea serpent. Long story short, more than likely the stories of Saint Olav and what he did during his life and the miracles that were performed were more than likely made up by the church to convert people who were still holdouts to the old ways. Because we see a lot of the aspects of Saint Olav come from Thor and come from Freyr. He has a fertility aspect as well as this aspect of fighting giants and being a warrior. And then of course here we have a well that is attested to Saint Olav as well, coming from where he fell. More than likely, a vast majority of the stories about Saint Olav and how he existed and was this saint are more than likely made up by the church in order to convert holdouts from the heathen faith, and then using Saint Olav as an excuse for places like this that were tied to the pagan past and now have a Christian paint job put on top of them, along with a story to go along with it. Again, I can't confirm these things 100%, but we know that the church did this countless times across Europe, and I am sure it is no different here in Trondheim, Norway.
As my final days in Trondheim were wrapping up, I was able to have several more breakthroughs that have only solidified my theories about Trondheim even more. Hidden away in the south of the city is the NTNU Vitenskapsmuseet, a history museum containing millions of artifacts from Trondheim Fjord going all the way through the Stone Age to the Iron Age. I had been in Trondheim for 2 weeks at this point, and not one web search revealed this museum, and not one local recommended it to me, despite saying that I was interested in the ancient history here. And upon visiting, there were very few guests as well. Luckily, I was able to speak with a few people there to share my thoughts and theories with. What I was given there was a treasure trove of information. The most shocking piece of information that I learned is that St. Clement's Church, the ancient resting place of Olaf Haraldsson, otherwise known as St. Olav, thought to be the oldest church in Trondheim, that was originally built in 1015 CE, was recently dug up in 2016, and what was revealed was something that completely changes the church's history. St. Clement's Church was in fact built on top of another wooden structure that was built on top of another wooden structure. This could simply mean that 2 other churches burned down before the third one was finally built in 1015. What could actually be below the structure of this church is the remains of a pre-Christian temple that once existed here before 997. And certainly the archaeologists must have found something groundbreaking, because they closed down the museum and the ruins to outside guests, with plans to reopen in the coming years with the new information that has been found. Within the museum as well, I found a book called Under Trondheim that details the unearthing of lost history in Trondheim city. It turns out interest in ancient Trondheim did not come around until the 1900s, and the history of the city is being constantly rewritten and re-examined through early finds across several sites across the city. What this book also revealed is that in 2016, a burial mound was found on the Norse shores of the river near where Nidaros Cathedral stands today. Sadly, this burial mound is not visible today. However, someone that was working at the museum was able to point me to another burial mound found in the south of the city near a modern-day skate park.
So it took some searching, and like many things that I find in the ancient past, sometimes they're a lot harder to find than we realize. Because right here is, I believe, the burial mound that was listed. And one of the things that is mentioned on the website that was shown to me is that a sword was actually found here. And so some form of warrior was buried here at some point.
And the reason I believe it's this little mound right here is because there's a slight elevation. And at one point, there existed a sign talking about something right there. And so at one point in this town's history, there was a sign saying there was a burial mound here. But now that sign is gone. And again, this makes me question what is happening to this information. Why was at some point this talked about and had a marker saying this was here, and now you can barely find any trace of it? So there's not much more I can tell you about this burial mound here besides the fact that it exists. And as all the information I'm providing you that I was able to find at the museum here, this is only a kilometer away from Nidaros Cathedral, maybe 2 kilometers away. And so this proves that people were being buried in this river valley. And of course, we have the other burial mound that is no longer there and that you can't find. So when it comes to sites such as this burial mound, the most important thing we can do to help preserve them is to make sure that the skate park doesn't extend another 150 feet this way and destroy what we have left of it. We can talk to the city and say, hey, why don't we put a sign back here? What happened to the sign? You can go to the local museums and talk about these sites. And this is something you can do all around the world. I'm not a Norwegian person, so it would be very difficult for me to come and help preserve this site and preserve what ancient history there is left. What that is up to the people that live in these areas. And you can do this in North America, to my North American audience, as there's plenty of Native American burial mounds and ancient sites that need your preservation and your help today. Sites such as Serpent Mound are one of the few in Ohio that is actually known to people, but all across the United States there are burial mounds and other sacred sites of the indigenous people that were here long before the Europeans arrived. And so everywhere on the planet has ancient sites and places that can be preserved.
Within the medieval section of the museum, a map revealed that there were several burial mounds rumored to exist around the center of the city. And what this museum also revealed is that there were remains of structures that existed here before Olav Tryggvason, and this place was simply labeled as a seasonal trade center. This seasonal trade center is starting to look more and more like a city that existed here in the early Iron Age. The final thing that was shared with me in the museum is that in recent digs, a boat grave was found in the center of the town square, dating back to the Iron Age as well. There has also been finds of numerous mass graves where bodies from around the city were relocated, some even bearing strange folk customs, such as having rocks in their mouths or wooden branches buried within them. As Norwegian archaeologists continue to dig, the truth of Trondheim continues to be revealed. Little remained of Trondheim's ancient history, but I truly believe what I've been able to find in my short time here proves that the role of this area in the ancient past was far more significant than is commonly known. And as is being revealed by modern archaeologists, there is a much deeper story to this quiet city in the center of Norway. I cannot say much with 100% certainty, but I can say many things with a lot of confidence. I know that kings were crowned here, heathen rulers met here, ancient people performed unknown rituals all around these hills, and an untold amount of people have been buried here in the ancient customs of the pagan tribes. And I know that humans have been creating history in this valley possibly since the Stone Age. And yet all that is told from this multi-thousand-year history is that in 997 Trondheim was founded as a Christian city by Olav Tryggvason. And later, Olav Haraldsson was made a saint, solidifying the conversion to Christianity in Norway, closing the book on the ancient beliefs that existed here. I do not think that there is a conspiracy now to keep this information from people, but I do not deny that we are still feeling the effects of one of the greatest cover-ups in our history, a cover-up that was implemented by the ego-ridden minds of Christian rulers who sought power and control through any means necessary. But luckily, all is not lost, as long as we don't stop digging, both in research and also in the mud. The only way the ancient people will be forgotten is if we stop talking about them. And that is my main purpose for this channel and in this video, is to share information about the ancient world. So let's all do our part to make sure that they do not go quietly into the night and help to build a more informed world that respects its ancient roots. My name is Jacob Thompson, and thank you for joining me for this video on ancient Norway. Be sure to follow this channel as I continue my journey deeper into the ancient world.